Hello, it's Imogen Ragone here with Body Intelligence, and I'm joined by relational neuroscience educator Shay Seaborne, and we're going to talk about the ins and outs of rupture and repair, and how and when to make a repair, and the way in which repaired relationships are often strengthened by a repair. And we've called this video the Relational Superpower Everyone Needs. So there you go. So welcome, Shay.
Thank you.
So maybe we should just start off really by explaining what we're meaning by rupture and repair. Let's start with the rupture. What is a rupture in this kind of sense of a relationship? And also, just to be clear, we're talking about any relationship you have. Friend, family member, could be a romantic partner, a work colleague, anything.
Healthcare practitioner.
Healthcare practitioner, a provider of some sort. Yes. So, yeah.
Yeah. A rupture is simply a moment of misunderstanding, conflict, or hurt. It happens when two nervous systems have interacted in a way that creates stress. And the important part is that isn't that the rupture happens, but how we move toward repair afterward. Each of us has our own story and needs and states of regulation. And when they clash, sometimes the nervous system will shift into a protective mode, often with fear or anger. And the brain is focused on safety and survival, not on connection.
Can you give a little example to put it in kind of very kind of everyday terms so people kind of...
Sure. I'll give one of my most memorable recent experiences. It was with a healthcare practitioner that I had a long history of trust relationship with. And there was just this little tiny moment of rupture when I said, I'm not doing well. And he said, oh, but you're doing da 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 da. Trying to, feeling like he was supporting me and trying to, have me look on the bright side. But he was also misattuned with where I was and what I needed. I needed him to understand I wasn't doing well and, give me some support for that rather than telling me that I shouldn't think that I'm doing bad despite what my body says.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not at all intentional. I understand that it was a protective response. Doctors don't want to hear when their patients aren't doing well. And, he thought he was doing the right thing by pointing out what he thought would, help me feel better.
And it wasn't what you needed in that moment.
Right.
It didn't. So we've talked often about this kind of, there's a misattunement between you. You were literally missing each other in needs. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to tell the rest of this story?
Sure.
Because it didn't just end with a rupture and then this lovely trusting relationship you had with him, and then that was done and over. That's not
right. Yeah, it did not end the relationship. No, it actually strengthened it in the end. It took me a while to integrate that experience because he had been so trustworthy for 5.5 years. It was a real shock to my system. And it also took me a while to understand exactly what the problem was and how to articulate it in a way that was, kind and respectful and calm, and focused on, the solution rather than what he did wrong. So it happened that I've been working on a new Della, the IPNB Ladybug book about relational rupture and repair. So I took in some of these paintings to show him and describe the rupture and the repair and what happens after. And this was based on my experience with a shipmate back when I was on Kalmar Nickel. And it was such a profound experience to have this rupture, and the effect of the repair after that. 9 years later, it still affects me. So I told him that whole story, and then noted that, just very briefly, that there had been a rupture. And I didn't even go into details. I just said, I'm not blaming you. I know it was a protective mechanism, and I just would like you to be aware and to be with me as much as possible. And he understood what I meant. And after my treatment, he said, I'm sorry that you didn't feel seen and heard last time. And he didn't have to say anything more than that, because everything in his nervous system, all the cues from his body were saying that he meant that, and he understood what had happened, and he didn't want it to happen again, and that he cared more about the relationship than just, doing what, knee-jerk thing he had been doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. And you actually ended up having kind of almost two stories about rupture and repair in the one.
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I'd like to say with this one, I had 3 good days in a row after that repair. That's how much of an effect it had on my nervous system. I don't have 3 days good in a row. It just doesn't happen. But the power of a person, a caregiver, making that repair is more potent than most other types of repair, especially, in that particular situation. It had a profound effect on my nervous system, and it brought the relationship to a new level of trust that I feel every time I see him, or even like see the pop-up, you have an appointment with this doctor. It reinforces that he cares enough to say, oops, I did something I wish I hadn't done, and I will try hard not to do it again. And then I had kind of the opposite experience with a midwife who was so misattuned. She wasn't my regular one, so she didn't know anything about me, and that was a really bad thing. She also didn't take the time to get to know me. She just started blathering all this stuff that had nothing to do with what I was there for or what I needed, and it was very triggering, and it just kind of put me in freeze mode. I was just like, okay, hold on till this appointment's over. And it was awful to feel so grossly misunderstood and unseen. Even when I was telling her, I don't want to know that. I don't need to know that. That's not a problem for me. She kept going. It was crazy. And then I wrote an email, after thinking about it carefully and, doing all the looking at the neurobiology of everything. And I explained to her in the email, this is what happened. There was a rupture, and here's what I needed, and here's what happened, and here's why this was not a good effect on me. And the very delayed apology was not a real apology. It focused more on why she couldn't answer sooner, and she never really took responsibility for her behavior. And then ended her email with, this is the last response I'll give you on this. Yeah. And I was just so shocked that, that kind of treatment from a midwife. I had both of my children with, midwives. And up to that point, I had every reason to, feel safe and comfortable with them. But that ended that. So go ahead.
Another big difference I'm just noticing from hearing about this is that this wasn't someone you had a relationship with ahead of time that kind of warranted saving if possible, right?
Right. Yeah, it was a huge rupture with somebody I had no relationship with.
Yeah,
it was like there was no health, no care, just rupture. So very easy to close the door on that relationship. In the whole practice, I'm done, out of there. Any place that treats people like that is, it's one thing to have the rupture, but to not make the repair, to like willfully avoid it. That tells me so much about not just that particular practitioner, but the entire culture there.
Yeah, you're making me think. Well, one, like reflecting on kind of some of my own experiences, and can definitely think about times when there has been some sort of rupture to use that language, and that when it has been repaired, when we've come together authentically and acknowledged what happened and taken responsibility, it's really strengthened the relationship. But I'm also now thinking in the context of companies, and I'm kind of thinking like sometimes when, or a service that you've received, and then sometimes if it's like awful, but then they make this really excellent gesture in, you know, replacing the product and more than, or replacing the meal and offering to, whatever the thing is, then that actually strengthens your bond to that product or restaurant or company or whatever it is. So we hadn't really thought about it as a kind of a commercial thing, but it really flows into any aspect of any type of relationship. So,
right, and any person or organization that doesn't recognize that isn't going to do well in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. And so just to make it clear, if we haven't already, it is very normal for any relationship, even the most healthy relationship, to have a rupture occasionally, because we're never going to be 100% aligned and attuned every moment of the, every meeting and day with each other, because we have our own thoughts and distractions and stresses and all sorts
our
of
own
things.
internal state.
Yeah, our own
that
internal
changes
state
throughout the day, month, year.
But it's if we can, I mean, we talked about how you can repair, but whether you should repair and whether it's always necessary. And I suppose if it's a very, very minor, tiny thing in a relationship that's just super healthy and trusting, and it was a blip and it's just very obvious for every behavior, and that, so maybe it wouldn't be worth going there. But I think maybe in the best case scenario, even with the tiniest blip, if the person recognizes that I was distracted and I know you were telling me something important and I really wasn't with you, whatever the thing is, if you can acknowledge that immediately, then it doesn't even become anything to have to think about to repair, because it's kind of repaired immediately almost.
Yeah, that happened with my NARM therapist. Only once in 4+ years of therapy with her was there any rupture, and it was very tiny, very momentary. She caught herself immediately, apologized, said she wouldn't do it again, and that was it. And I only remember it because it was so unique that, it hadn't happened before. If it was something that had happened on occasion, I probably wouldn't even remember it. It'd be like, yeah, that's normal. That's perfectly normal. That's hardly a rupture. It's not something that sticks in your nervous system and bothers you for months afterward.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe there's a word less than rupture. I keep saying blip, but it's just like it.
Well, it's ultimately it's a disconnection, a misattunement.
Yeah, a little disconnect.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, in these cases when it's not have that immediate repair, that maybe the next best case scenario, so say we were having some conversation, you were bearing your soul to me, and I was thinking about something else, my cat. No, but I was, for whatever reason, I wasn't with you. And I didn't realize at the time because I was so distracted by my own thing. But I might come home and then think about it and realize, oh, I think Shay was telling me something really important and I really wasn't listening. And then I'm thinking that would be easier for you if I then reach out and recognize that and tell you that. And
that would give me a very strong message that you were maybe not aware in that moment, but you were aware enough to recognize it later, and that you care enough to come back and bring it up and make the repair.
Yeah. But sometimes it is a relationship that's really strong and you want to continue, but the person, I'll use me in this example, I might be so immersed in my own stuff, I really didn't realize. And you're still suffering because you didn't get what you needed from me. And I'm in my own thing and don't even realize. So then it's more onus on you, but it kind of like you did with your doctor. He didn't realize, but you did bring it up to him. So then I'm hoping, as good friends, you would let me know in a nice way.
Yes, I would make sure that that my upset was over. You know, the initial rush of emotions and all those stress hormones and everything.
Yeah.
And I would think about it until I was clear on what the issue really was and what I had really needed and how I wanted to approach you. And then I would use the famous I messages to explain. You know, I'd say something like, I felt unheard when you stared out the window when I was talking about my cat. And I need you to, you know, witness my kitty's health problems too, or whatever it is. And that would leave it
Yes.
open to you. It's not saying, you know, do it or die. It's explaining what happened to me and what my needs are.
You're keeping it to your experience, and what you would ideally need.
Yeah, I wouldn't go, you were more interested in your cat than you were in me, and because that would be counterproductive, and it would be reinforcing the disconnect rather than creating the space for the reconnect.
Yeah. So anything else you want to say? I mean, we've kind of in passing spoken about that this can strengthen relationships. You want to say something more about that?
Yeah, it's really, the repair is one of the best ways to strengthen a relationship because it builds connection and deepens trust. And that seems, you know, pretty obvious if you think about it a little bit, but there's also more neuroscience behind that. It promotes healing and resilience by supporting brain integration and shifting negative patterns. And it improves our physiological and emotional regulation. And this goes two ways. It's not, you know, you apologize to me, I accept your apology, and I get all the benefit. It's both ways, all of it.
Yeah.
What our nervous systems were made for, that kind of safe connection.
Yeah. So obviously we've talked about relationships that are important to us, that are worth at least trying to repair if there's a rupture. You spoke about the incident with the midwife, which was a rupture but wasn't worth pursuing a repair on. That was like then the boundary. So what would be a situation? I'm kind of thinking if there are like serial, you rupture, you repair, and you think it's all good, and then they do the same thing, or they do a very similar, and then it just keeps going on. How many? Yeah.
I had that experience with a psychologist. She was a somatic experiencing psychologist. You know, they focus on what's happening in the body, right?
Yeah.
And this was 5 years ago, and I spent 7 weeks very near death and a whole year struggling very hard to live. And I told her that my body said I might not make it, and my body said I might die. And she said, "Oh, that's just one of your parts," and didn't want to talk about the part. The first time was after the first 5 weeks of being that way. And I recovered enough to say, "Hey, this is what happened. And I, you know, really needed you to be there and you weren't." And she apologized profusely and said, "Oh my gosh, I probably do this with other clients too. And I want to be aware of that and change things." You know, she's a professional. She's supposed to do these things, right? So I trusted her. And then months later, I had 2 more weeks where I was very near death. and she did the same thing. And after, and that was just devastating, to have your doctor say there's nothing wrong with you when you're laying there dying. She's denying your reality. Both my doctors did that. Anyway, so when I brought it up to her again later, she started crying and said, I guess I just don't have the bandwidth. And that's when I knew I had to fire her.
Wow. So she wasn't even then kind of trying to repair. She was saying she couldn't do what you needed.
Yeah, at least she was honest about
So she was,
at that point. But that was, months later after she'd harmed me deeply by abandoning me when that was the last thing I needed. So, that relationship was not worth continuing because the magnitude of the harm from the misattunement, the depth of the misattunement, it was so great that, even she admitted that she didn't have the bandwidth for my somatic experience. So clearly there was no point in trying to pursue any, further relationship there.
However, bringing it back to the key message is when it is a relationship that is supportive and healthy, that it's very, very worthwhile repairing, and that strengthens the relationship.
Yeah, and over time, cycles of rupture and repair help build resilience in the relationships, and it teaches both people that they can weather the storms and still find their way back to each other.
Yeah. So that seems to me like maybe a good place to end. I'd just like to say that Shay and I offer a 6-week course for people who are stressed and anxious and just kind of dealing with life in general. It's using tools from body intelligence, neuroscience of trauma, and it's called Foundations of Regulation. And the next course is starting on October 16th. So that's on Zoom, 6 weeks. It's a small group, interactive group. So if you're interested, we have that. I also offer half-hour constructive rest sessions, which are just a great place to reduce stress and let go of some of the tensions of life, I think. And that's just the next one is next week on Tuesday at 2:30 Eastern. That's also on Zoom. As Shay reminded me, if you found this helpful or interesting, do please like, follow, and share. If you have any questions or comments about anything we talked about, we love to hear from you, and we will get back to you. Anything else before we sign off?
I think we covered it all.
We did. All right. Thanks for being with us.